Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Hoy. I'm the Director of Strategy with The Truth. We are a multifaceted marketing services organization that specializes in design. And we have been asked to help participate in creating the overall brand for the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. I'm here with my colleague, Nick Schultz, who's our Creative Executive Director, and today we're actually going to walk you through the options that we have for our brand logos. So when we talk about logo, that's often what people first think of when you talk about a brand, but a brand is so much more than just the logo. That is just one piece of our communication. The brand is how we tell our overall story, our look, our tone, our feel, the overall way that we present ourselves. And the logo is just going to be the first piece. It's often not the first thing we look at. This is a little bit of a different process, but ultimately this will grow to include all of the things that I just mentioned, to cover all of our look, all of our tone, all of our feel. And that's going to be rolling out over the first part of 2021. But the logo is going to help to inspire those other pieces, and that's the decision that this presentation is going to hope to inform. Once we've completed this part of the process, we'll move into actually the documentation of the story and how we position RMRI. We'll talk about perhaps some conceptual campaigns. If we were to do some sort of advertising, what might that look like? We're not actually creating the real thing, but to actually be able to provide some context to see the brand as if it were in real life. And then lastly, we'll be documenting all of this into a brand book, which will be the core reference as we go forward for the next several years of applying our brand. Okay. So, in order to go ahead and evaluate logos, many of you may not be familiar with how to think about, evaluating creative product. Often it's just you might look at it and say, hey, I like it or I don't like it, but not necessarily know why you like it or not like it. But how you feel about it, whether you do like or not like, could be dependent upon how you think about what it's trying to describe. Okay. So often we would do this part before the logo, where just because of the way the needs are within the organization, this has not been fully fleshed out. But we believe that the RMRI brand could be represented by something that appears like this, if this were our story. Okay, so think of this as the creative brief by which you're going to evaluate what we're going to show you here in a moment. So the objective of this is to add value. In other words, what's the branding? What is it all about? And we believe that the branding is about adding value, okay, by elevating out of the typical style of government-led projects, which we think will then enable us to further solidify the unity of the project partners, which is certainly something very unique about the shared stewardship type programs. We've got multiple different entities all coming together to focus any effort that is to be given is going to be focused into one area. We want to solidify the unity. That is something that's essential to the equity of the brand. And then secondly, to attract the attention of the general public. There was an insight at the beginning of the creation of RMRI that in order to be successful, we need to get the public on board. And the public is accustomed to a more commercialized approach to things than what a typical government-led program might be. And so this is as we try to build the prototype for shared stewardship type programs and try to build a new model for that, we think that attracting the public in is going to be essential. And we think that branding is something that can help do that because it's something the public is familiar and very comfortable with. The challenge is that the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative is poised to be a breakthrough concept in how large-scale land restoration management is conducted. We're going to try to unify private citizens, organizations, and businesses in Colorado with government agency and their resources. And this is an important insight that I'll get to here in a moment. As a result, RMRI believes we're going to be effective on a scale that hasn't been accomplished before. Even the closest comparable program, though generally well thought of, and you can kind of imagine in your mind what you think that might be. There are several that, depending on who you are, you might think of different ones, but the closest comparable program doesn't stand out to the public in a meaningful way or leave any kind of memorable signature on the work that we do. Okay, So the deliverables for this project need to help define that RMRI brand, the way it looks, sounds, and feels, such that it's noticeable, and this is some important criteria. It's noticeable, it's sticky enough to be recognized, it inspires inquiry, and shapes the way that people talk about land restoration for many years. So the brand is so much more than the logo, as you can tell just from that statement. The insight, the unique thing that drives the RMRI brand is that private entities know where restoration work should be prioritized, and public entities have the resources to do the work, yet they aren't designed to work well together. As a result, the land is unwell and vulnerable. Okay? RMRI is here to solve that. The strategic platform that we're using is the idea that a problem for all takes all to solve. Again, we all have the issue. We're all going to come together. Historically, we haven't been designed to do that well. The model upon which RMRI is built is going to try to do that. Okay, so a problem for all takes all to solve. And we know we'll be successful when RMRI instills the confidence that significant progress can be made together. So as you're thinking about these logos, think about this story behind it. Whenever you look at it, does it make me go, yeah, I can see that standing for what Stephen has presented here? Okay. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So what was our material? What did we start to work with? Well, as many of you who are listening may recall, I had done some interviews. I may have spoken to many of you as stakeholders in the project. And through that process, we were able to draw out not just the story that I just started to describe, but also some of the elements that we think are probably pretty essential. Either they're going to be expected or we should make sure we consider in order to make sure that story starts to come through. Okay, so these aren't all of it, but these are some of the elements that we wanted to make sure we took into consideration. So certainly at the forefront are the 4 values that we've agreed to help support with our project. The idea of unity, the idea of coming together, anybody who has an effort to give is all brought together so that we can focus that effort in the most effective and efficient ways. The mountains, of course, we are talking about the Rocky Mountains. At the same time, you know, any kind of logo in Colorado typically has mountains, and so this was a particular part of the creative challenge, was making sure that we incorporate the mountains without it just looking like, you know, the local donut shop or the local optometry shop. It starts to stand out in kind of a unique way. The national relevance. You know, we do know that this is focused in a particular region, but something that we think is particularly important, especially because of the program sponsors with the U.S. Forest Service and National Wild Turkey Federation. This is not just a program for Colorado. This is a program for all Americans. It just happens to be focused on the Rocky Mountains. But because of the landscape scale of this, even in Cincinnati, Ohio, where Nick and I live, we understand the Rocky Mountains. We've visited it, we've spent some time there, and even if you haven't, we understand the significance to our national culture of the Rocky Mountains, right? And so we wanted to be careful that we didn't just make this very Colorado focused, and that there are style elements and so forth that just make it about Colorado and very obviously Colorado. We think this should be about building a model for shared stewardship, and that has national relevance. So how do we make the Rocky Mountains nationally relevant? Or tap into the national relevance of the Rocky Mountains, rather. And then, of course, the cool factor. There has to be something that makes you, again, that stickiness, makes me want to know more, makes me want to remember it, makes me want to wear it on a shirt. And again, that's not the brand. Often that's how people think of branding. And it is an important thing. It's got to have a bit of a cool factor, something that just kind of, I want to be with that thing. I want it to represent me. And so therefore, I would put it on personal items. Okay, so that's the creative components that we used. At the same time, we wanted to bring a breadth of options. And so we have some that are on the more literal end, and we have some that are more on the abstract end, and some that are in the middle. Okay, and we don't have a strong recommendation at this point. We think that some people are going to be attracted to one end, and some are going to be attracted to the others, and we're going to use the good mix of a group that we have here in order to discern what the best option there is. Okay, so these are the components, and this is the scale upon which we would think about evaluating them. But before we get to the logos, there is one more important topic that we want to talk about. And that is, at The Truth, we strongly believe that we should consider a name change. And let me walk through why we would make that recommendation. So Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative is a really good start. It makes sense to government people. It may make sense to corporate people, but it has some elements to it that don't necessarily make it the best for a brand, right? And we are looking at this from a brand perspective. So let me talk about some of those challenges. The first is that whenever we use the word initiative, it feels like kind of a single time, one-time type project. It also doesn't really feel like a thriving networked community that someone personally could be a part of. And let me remind you that one of the reasons we're approaching this as a brand and trying to incorporate branding into the model is to try to get the public involved, to try to get them to see themselves as being a part of this. Think of any kind of movement that you might have seen lately and how that starts to get displayed in your neighborhood, in your local area, whether you see it on a vehicle or in a window or something like that. You know, there's something about it that makes people feel like they can be a part of that movement, okay? It's also a little obscure. It doesn't have really clear meaning to the average person. Outside of Rocky Mountain, maybe restoration, probably not initiative. And then you put all these words together, it's a bit obscure. I have to be explained what this means. I don't just see the name and go, I think I know what that is. It could be a lot of different things, okay? It's also either a little too long, actually a lot long whenever you put it all together, the full name, or it's too short. If you make it just RMRI, it definitely doesn't have any meaning, right? So I have to explain it if I use the full amount, but I can't even get started if I just use RMRI because we don't have any equity in that, okay? So that starts to have a couple of issues. Not only is it the explaining issue, but when it comes to technically using this in a logo or in communications, it starts to become very difficult and unwieldy to start to fit this into spaces or even make it readable if you're driving or walking past. It's just a lot to take in. So whenever you take these 3 points together, it makes Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, in our opinion, not very strong as a brand name, okay? That said, what would a good brand name have? Okay, well, we think that it would describe our cause directly, that when you read the name, immediately something comes to mind. Now, it may not be accurate. Now, if we did our good job, it probably would be, okay? But something comes to mind that's pretty close to what it actually is just by reading the name, okay? It's understandable to the average person, and I want to make clear this actually did come up a couple of times in the stakeholder interviews that we conducted. The idea that, especially the word initiative, is a bit of a barrier to the understanding for the average person, let alone the long name and kind of the government or corporate feel to it. It doesn't feel warm and fuzzy. It's much more cold and prickly. Okay. We believe that a good brand name should orient the reader to action. That is, it makes me want to keep it, as I read the name or see the name or hear the name, it starts me moving forward and I feel compelled to keep that movement to a degree. Okay, it sort of orients me to action. Importantly, it's very flexible in the branding uses. That is that we can use it in a wide variety of different ways and it fits the form factor of where it needs to go, is not a real barrier to using it. Okay, so long enough to be meaningful, short enough to fit in the right spaces that it needs to be fit into, and always, of course, readable. And then last but certainly not least, that it's in this modern environment, it's easy to navigate online. That is, with search engines, your name is an obvious answer to the questions that somebody might put into a search engine, or simply bite-sized content. So think social media, where there's a lot of information in your feed, or your email. There's a lot of information in your email. You might just be scanning, and we need to design things so that you can just see it, get it, got it. I can pick it up, I can get the idea and move on to the next thing, right? And having the long name or having an obscure name or having one that doesn't really, or it requires a lot of explanation doesn't fit well into those online requirements. So we do believe that we should strongly consider a name change. We also believe that the name Restore the Rockies, it could be as simple as something like that. We think that works really well. We do think that we should go through the exercise of looking at a variety of options and having the opportunity for, presenting the opportunity for all of you to participate in that process in some way. That said, today we need to start the process of evaluating the logos, and the name absolutely impacts the logos and how you might feel about the logos in accordance with the brief that I had given a few moments ago. So in order to be able to inform the decision to be made, we've gone ahead and put together two variations on the logos that are in consideration. We've done the full name, Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, or RMRI, depending on usage. And we've gone ahead and provided an alternative with the new name. And we've gone ahead and used Restore the Rockies because we think that it is a good alternative as a name. We've gone ahead and used it as a proxy for whatever that new name might be, should we choose to go that way. Okay, so that's the placeholder for whatever it might be, but we do think that it's a good option. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nick, and he's going to walk us through the consideration set for the logos.
Great, thank you, Steve. So I want to before I get into that slide, I want to just reverse back one slide real quick. We're going to have three concepts that we present, and all three of these, we think checks the box on all four of these kind of attributes that we're looking to bake in. But where we're going to start is probably somewhere in the middle. Okay, and so you'll get a good sense of kind of this middle ground between something that's more literal and something that's more abstract. In the second concept, we're going to kind of shift this dial up towards an execution that's a little bit more literal. And in the third concept, we're gonna bring the lever down to a place that's a little bit more abstract. And we'll take a look at the end, all three side by side. Again, as Steve mentioned, with each one of these concepts, you're going to be able to see the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative naming first, and then we'll have the second option, Restore the Rockies, as kind of a naming proxy for that exercise of finding a potential other name. But we wanted to kind of illustrate the impact that shorter name has. So those benefits that Steve discussed around that shorter name do manifest in how it comes to life visually as well. And it opens up the door for us to have a little bit more flexibility in its application. And I think you'll see that as we go through the work. You'll also see a variety of mock-ups that we created just to illustrate how the logo can work out into the wild. Now, these aren't final. They're not real pictures, or they look real. We haven't created anything yet. They're all just kind of Photoshop mock-ups to get the idea across, and it'll just help all of us get a sense of, yep, I can see when this goes out into the world, it'll start working really well. Or, yep, when it goes out of the world, maybe we might have some challenges here or there. So these visuals that we have after we talk to each logo will really help give us a sense of the overall flexibility with the logo. Okay, so let's get into the concepts here. There are three. This first concept starts out more in the middle. Okay. So here is our first concept. So on the left-hand side, we've got the main logo. On the right-hand side, we've got a couple different orientations or versions of the logo. All right, but let's start on the left. It was very important for us, obviously, the four values, unity, mountains, those three attributes that we discussed earlier of the five were really, really central to how we thought about these designs. So first and foremost, clearly the mountains. So we've got four peaks and kind of four valleys with the kind of natural landscape above and water below as a reflection. And then we've got within each one of those these kind of overlapping triangles. So what these do is represent the kind of the multiple 4 values that we have in water and wildlife and community and recreation, kind of each peak representing one. But the fact that they are overlapping and kind of locked together represent that unity, all kind of taking shape of a nice mountain landscape. So the mark is designed to be pretty contemporary. It doesn't necessarily feel like something that you know, it is follows those kind of more stereotypical Rocky Mountain outdoors camping, you know, type space. It's kind of designed to fit in many different types of applications. Very clean and contemporary, a bit more on the sophisticated side. And then below we've got the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative logo type. As you can see, it's a more blocky font, kind of represent strength, and we've got it on 2 lines here. You're going to see throughout as kind of a thread throughout all the logo designs. You know, it is quite a long name, so it can be a little unwieldy to work with, but it does work. Okay, we'll just have to be a little bit more strategic about how we start to apply it with a name that is as long as Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. To help facilitate that, we do have those variants there on the right, so that we could position the main emblem, the triangle mountains, to the left of the logo type, and that works well. We could use that in a website header, for instance. You could see that working well on any type of business collateral. We could also abbreviate Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative with RMRI, and we think it works just as well there. Okay, so you can see it locked up at the bottom and left to right. But the logo itself, again, it's meant to be, you know, represent the 4 values with the 4 peaks. We've got unity with the kind of interlocking triangles. We've got mountains clearly. We do feel like because it is, you know, it has this clean contemporary feel, it'll have it is more likely to have, you know, good national relevance, and you know, it's a very clean look. It's got that cool factor that you'll see as we start to mock up some of these in just a second. It looks nice when we start applying it on you know, different types of gear. Now, just to illustrate the visual impact a shorter name could have, we brought it to life also with Restore the Rockies. And so you can see that there, again, all the same qualities and benefits of that emblem, but when you shorten the name, the whole mark just becomes a lot tighter. And you can really start to see it can work well across multiple situations without necessarily having to choose between the long name and a shorter abbreviated name like RMRI. So to help illustrate the 2 options from a look and feel perspective, we've got it here on a campfire mug. You can see here, I mean, both work fairly well. I mean, this is more of an intimate kind of setting here on an actual mug. It's not meant to really broadcast mass awareness out into the world, but it does work pretty well. We're going to have to make some choices though, especially with the Rocky Mountain Restoration name, that at certain times that long name won't necessarily work as well. For instance, like on a hat, you can see on the right, Restore the Rockies. It works well. That's about as long as you'd want to, is about as much wording you'd want to put on the front of a hat there. You can imagine Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative on the front of a hat would just be too much. So we'd have to make a choice then with Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative to abbreviate, use the acronym on certain applications, in this instance, a hat, where we just use the RMRI. But from a design perspective, equally as strong, and we think equally as successful. There are other places where we will be a little bit more hamstrung with how we apply it from a color perspective. For instance, like a polo shirt, if you're doing embroidery or other types of applications, you may only get to choose one color. You know, while the actual shirt may have multiple colors, what you can customize may only allow you to do one color. Okay, and so how does something like that work? Well, that's what this mock-up is for, is to illustrate, while you may have applications where you've got lots of color, like this polo shirt, in this instance, we've given an example of, well, we've got to choose one color. And so we've taken the mountains, the top part, and made that a solid color. And the reflection is just the outline, right, to give us a sense of what that reflection would be. But both work well with the RMRI or the Rocky Mountain, Restore the Rockies. Both of those names work well there. Again, if you imagine on the right-hand side, if we had Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative spelled out, that may be a little long and a little cumbersome for the front of a shirt. And then the last mock-up we did for this, and this might actually be, one of the more important ones. We've got it mocked up on just kind of a sample bistro here, but this is where people start to celebrate in a more public fashion their involvement or their support with our initiative here. And so you can see there on the left, Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative kind of spelled out, and then on the right, we've got Restore the Rockies. Both do a good job visually. From a design perspective, it works. I think as you're a passerby and walking through, I think you're starting to get a sense, here of the impact the name can have. It's a little cleaner on Restore the Rockies. It's probably a little bit more noticeable because as you're just kind of window shopping, it's something that you don't really have to look for a long time to really read about it. And it almost feels like that a mission mindset, an anthem. Whereas Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, that almost could just as much be the sign for the office, not necessarily the support of the mission. So you're starting to see the impact from a design perspective, relatively the same, but I think in this example you start to get the impact of the communication that the naming choice has on our brand. Okay, so with that one, we're in that middle ground, kind of between more literal and more abstract. Let's take a second to make it a little bit more literal, and by that I mean when we think about the 4 values. Is there a way that those could come through? They do come through now in the 4 peaks, right? And we've got the various colors and the interlocking of the unity of the triangles. But we challenge ourselves to say, okay, well, what could we do to more literally get across wildlife, water, community, and recreation? Those 4 core values at the center of our initiative. And what would that look like in a mark? Okay. And that got us to this concept here. So in this one, we have thrown all of our weight behind this letter R, okay? Rocky Mountain being kind of a singular idea and Restoration Initiative being kind of a singular idea. The R we felt is probably the most important letter. And we took a second, we took this opportunity within the R to build in a more literal interpretation of those 4 values. So top right, you get the wildlife and the habitat. You get the water as you go down clockwise. You get the water. You get the recreation there at the bottom of the R on about 6, 7, 8 o'clock. And then you start to get the city and the mountains in the background that make up the community. Okay, and so all 4 in that clockwise fashion represents the 4 key values that we have. We've got a couple different compositions of this as a more of an official seal there on the left. So Rocky Mountain up top, Rocky Mountain being the focus. It's got the bigger emphasis in the actual mark, and then Restoration Initiative a little smaller underneath. And then we've got a couple different orientations with the R on top, R to the left of Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. And then when we have those opportunities that longer wording cannot work, we can look at RMRI, and we think that can work there as well. This gets cleaned up a little bit more when we start to look at a different name like Restore the Rockies. So you can see it can get pretty busy. There's a lot of letters in here with that longer name. So Restore the Rockies is going to free us up a little bit from an execution and application standpoint. when we start to get the mark out there. As we apply it to the same types of applications, we've got a coffee mug here. Again, we have to make the choice with the one on the left to go with the RMRI because just Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative was going to be a bit too long. For both of these concepts, either name, I think what we'd want to do with this logo option is really rally behind that R as being the unique equity element that becomes just synonymous with the initiative. And so we take it here on a hat, and we're just leveraging the R itself. Okay. Now it's going to be a little bit of time we have to use before we can confidently use that R without any naming. In fact, on a hat like this, we would probably need something like Rocky RMRI on the side of it, or probably even on the front. But we think it, eventually could have some potential where it becomes its own unique piece. It is going to be a little challenging to execute when it gets smaller because there's a lot of pieces in there. So we're going to have to factor that in as we start to execute. From a one color perspective, this here, and another interesting component to this is we did rely on those four kind of different colors to help illustrate those values. When we've got a one color system, the question is, do you feel like it is equally as successful when executing in one color? Okay, so it's going to be fewer applications where we have to do execute in one color. So we're not overly concerned that having places where there's only one color will impact the overall equity, but we do have to factor that in. That color does play an important role. Those four different colors does play an important role in the overall communication, and that there will be some places where we don't have the luxury of color to help communicate that. Another example of that is, say, a one color vinyl sticker that might be a window. So you can certainly see the RMRI, you can see the wildlife in the water, you can see the recreation, the community graphically, but the color is not necessarily able to be leveraged there to help amplify that. Okay, so that is the logo that is a little bit more literal, and we're really trying to work in specifically the values into the letter R mark itself. Okay, now lastly, we're going to bring it back down to something maybe a little bit more abstract, and when you do that, it allows us a little bit more freedom to scale the logo up and down and use it on a variety of different applications. Okay, so what is that concept? This is concept C, and here is that mark. So clearly at the center here is this really dynamic mountain range. So these are designed to represent the four values. So water, wildlife, community, and recreation. We're not yet necessarily at this point assigning one color to each of the values. We probably will do that at some point. And I think the other thing we'll want to pull out is while there is one mark that is larger, the orange one is larger than the others. That's not to say any one of the values is any more important. What we're trying to do is create a look that feels really dynamic. You get the interwovenness of the different colors all kind of linking and joining together helps create that dynamic feel of a group of folks working together in a new way. It's got kind of a modern feel to it, in a new way to help kind of achieve our mission. It is vertically oriented, so in that way as well, it has a more modern feel, and we think that can help it stand out from many of the others that might be out there in the real world. And we're using a color palette that is these kind of more bright earth tones. So we didn't go all the way down into kind of these more desaturated colors, but we wanted to make sure that they still felt inspired from our the wildlife and our surroundings. We've got it on the left with Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative, and we've got it on the right with RMRI. Both work, and I think work well. Now, with the Restore the Rockies, we did have the opportunity here to introduce another element to this logo, and that is these twin R's. Because Restore the Rockies, you've got the two R's there in the name. We did see that as an opportunity to create another unique visual that could represent our name. And so we've got that incorporated on the left with Restore the Rockies and on the right without Restore the Rockies. As we start to apply this in the real world on campfire mugs, you can see it works there in that nice vertical orientation. It's pretty different, pretty modern. We like how that starts to look. On a hat concept here with RMRI instead of Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Again, that would be too long to put in such a small application. Restore the Rockies is about as much as you'd want to put in these types of applications. In one color, now you're going to have the same conversation that we had really with all of them. We've used color to help provide dimension or help illustrate the four values. But there are going to be some places where we were not afforded the luxury of color. And so we ask ourselves, does it still work? Do we like how it works? Yes, I think both of these work well. Anyone that sees the logo on a shirt here, if they are inquiring about it, they're going to go to the website, or you're going to have a business card, or there'll be other places where they're going to see that logo in full color. So, but it does work well. We don't necessarily need the box to contain it. But we are going to have to make a choice there on the left to probably keep with the acronym, the abbreviated name RMRI versus the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. And then lastly, we've got a larger window sign here. I think both work well. That vertical orientation, I think, works really well in these types of window marks, which we think could really benefit us, considering how important local businesses, private citizens are going to be to our mission here. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, and he's just going to do a little bit of a recap as we evaluate the options side by side here. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Nick. So all together, here are the three options, seeing them side by side. And of course, we've got two variations on each, one with the full name and then one with the placeholder name, Restore the Rockies, which again, I emphasize, we do strongly recommend that we take a look at a name change. We do also believe that Restore the Rockies is a good option, but we would want to allow for you to participate in that process in some way as well. We just needed to have something to be able to demonstrate the impact it has on the logos. And of course, as we started this conversation, those logos shouldn't just be based in I like it or I don't like it, but yes, you should like it, but it should also be a reflection of the brand, right? We believe that the brand, is best represented by that longer brief that is at the front, but the key components of it are repeated here. The objective, that is, we're trying to add value by elevating out of the typical style of government-led projects, which we hope will lead to a further solidification of the unity of our project partners and also attract the attention of the general public, which was the impetus for bringing a branding element to this project and to begin with. The strategic platform, this idea that a problem for all takes all to solve, and anyone who has an effort to give, it's all focused through RMRI or whatever name we might choose. Okay, a problem for all takes all to solve. And we know we'll be successful when RMRI instills confidence that significant progress can be made together. Which of these logos do we want to have represented, assuming we're successful, that we look at that and we go, yeah, just what I love about that organization is I just feel so confident about how they have helped us to believe in ourselves and making progress together. So those are our three options. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and thank you so much for allowing us to have an impact on the RMRI brand.